He was Lord Addy Myers, the Duke of Westmoreland, a man whose name commanded respect in every corner of the British Empire. Yet for one summer, he chose to be no one. He traded his silk coats for coarse livery, his title for the simple name, Leo, and his sprawling duchy for the servants' quarters of a countryside manor. His mission? To discover the true character of his arranged fiancée, the famously beautiful, but reportedly icy, Lady Geneviève de Courtenay. He sought the truth, hoping to find a heart beneath the polished exterior. But in the shadowed gardens of her home, he found his truth in a single, devastating whisper, a whisper that did not just break his hope, but threatened to shatter the very man he was. The dust of the road was a commoner's affliction, and Lord Addy Myers, the 8th Duke of Westmoreland, was finding it profoundly irritating. It settled in a fine grey film on the cheap wool of his borrowed coat and worked its way into his lungs with every jolt of the hired coach. For a man accustomed to the perfectly sprung carriages of his own fleet, this journey was a particular form of torment. His valet, Grimes, a man whose face was a permanent mask of stoic disapproval, sat opposite him. "Your Grace, it is not too late to reconsider this theatrical folly." "It is not folly, Grimes," Addy retorted, wiping a smudge of dirt from the window pane to peer at the rolling green hills. "It is reconnaissance. I am to bind my life, my name, and my future to this woman. I will not do so blind. The gossips in London paint Lady Geneviève de Courtenay as a marble statue, beautiful and cold, with a heart that beats only for the prestige a ducal coronet will bring. I need to know if there is a woman of substance beneath the ice, or merely a calculating ambition. And the only way to ascertain this is to polish her family's silver and carry her luggage?" Grimes asked, his eyebrow arched so high it nearly vanished into his hairline. "Precisely," Addy said with a grim smile. "As Duke, I would see only the performance she has perfected. As Leo, a mere footman joining the staff at Barrington Hall for the summer season, I will be invisible. I will see the unguarded moments. I will hear the whispers not meant for a duke's ears. I will find the real Geneviève de Courtenay." The plan had been surprisingly easy to execute. A distant cousin of Grimes had served as the butler at Barrington Hall for decades. The man, a Mr. Hobbs, was discreet, loyal, and owed the Myers family a significant favour. With the promise of a generous supplement to his retirement, Hobbs had agreed to hire a new, supposedly experienced footman from London, sight unseen. Upon their arrival, Addy was swiftly inducted into the world below stairs. The sheer difference was jarring. The air, thick with the smell of beeswax and boiling laundry, was a world away from the perfumed salons of his Mayfair residence. The hierarchy was just as rigid as the one above, but its currency was gossip and seniority, not titles and land. He was shown his quarters, a small, sparse room he would share with 2 other footmen, Thomas and William. They looked him over with a mixture of suspicion and indifference. He was taught the precise angle at which to hold a serving tray, the exact method for decanting wine without disturbing the sediment, and the cardinal rule, be silent, be swift, and be invisible. His first glimpse of his fiancée was not in a grand ballroom, but through the polished glass of the dining room doors. He was on duty, standing ramrod straight, his posture the only remnant of his true station. Lady Geneviève entered on the arm of her father, Baron de Courtenay, a man whose weathered face held the permanent anxiety of dwindling fortunes. The London gossips had not exaggerated her beauty. It was a masterpiece of aristocratic breeding, hair the colour of spun gold, swept into an elegant chignon, eyes a startling shade of cornflower blue, and a profile so perfect it could have been carved for a Roman coin. But it was her expression that captured Addie's attention. It was a mask of serene, impenetrable poise. Her smile, when she offered it to her younger sister, Rosalind, was technically flawless, but did not reach her eyes. She moved with a liquid grace, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders, a tension in the set of her jaw. He saw the marble statue, and his heart sank. For the first week, his duties kept him at a distance. He served at dinner, where she spoke little, her conversation limited to polite, intelligent observations on the weather or local politics. He saw her in the gardens, walking with a straight back and a measured pace, her gaze distant. She treated the staff with a cool, detached courtesy that was neither kind nor cruel. It was simply indifferent. To her, they were furniture that moved. Addie, as Leo, felt the sting of that indifference keenly. He, who could command the attention of Parliament with a single speech, was now less than a ghost in her presence. His hands, more accustomed to holding the reins of a prize stallion or the weight of a signet ring, grew rough from polishing brass and carrying logs. He learned to bite his tongue when the portly baron complained about the claret, a vintage Addie himself had gifted the family a year prior. He was beginning to believe the rumors were true, that this marriage was nothing more than a transaction, his title and wealth for her beauty and lineage. The thought left a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He had hoped for a partner, a companion, a wife. He was being presented with a duchess. One evening, he was tasked with clearing the drawing room after the family had retired. As he collected glasses, he noticed a book of poetry left open on a velvet chaise. It was Keats. He picked it up, his thumb brushing against a page where a single passage was underlined. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness. He heard a soft footfall and turned. Lady Genevieve stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, her hair unbound and tumbling over her shoulders. Without the rigid corset and elaborate coiffure, she looked younger, softer, and startlingly vulnerable. "You are the new footman," she stated. It was not a question. "Leo, is it not?" "Yes, my lady," Addie replied, his voice carefully neutral as he snapped the book shut and placed it on the table. Her eyes, those brilliant blue eyes, flickered to the book and then back to his face. For a fleeting moment, he saw something other than cool composure. It was a flash of... what? Curiosity? Suspicion? She studied him, truly looked at him, for the first time. "You read?" she asked, her tone betraying a sliver of surprise. "When I have the chance, my lady." "Keats is a hopeful romantic," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She took a step into the room, her gaze drifting towards the cold fireplace. Hope can be a dangerous indulgence. Without another word, she turned and glided from the room, leaving Addie standing in the silent drawing room, the scent of her lavender perfume lingering in the air. For the first time since his arrival, he felt a flicker of doubt. The marble statue had just shown its first, infinitesimal crack. Perhaps there was more to Lady Genevieve de Courtenay than met the eye. Or perhaps, he thought grimly, it was just a more sophisticated performance than he had anticipated. The exchange in the drawing room unsettled Addie. Genevieve's comment about hope being a dangerous indulgence echoed in his mind, a discordant note in the symphony of perfect composure she conducted around herself. It suggested a world-weariness that a young woman of her station should not possess. His mission, which had begun to feel like a grim confirmation of his fears, was now tinged with a reluctant curiosity. His new role as Leo began to grant him the access he had craved. Mr. Hobbs, perhaps taking pity on the newcomer's apparent diligence, or following some unspoken instruction from Grimes, began assigning him tasks that brought him closer to the family, specifically closer to Lady Genevieve. He was tasked with tending the fires in the private sitting rooms, delivering morning tea, and carrying books to and from the library. It was in these small, unguarded moments that Addie began to assemble a portrait of a woman entirely different from her public persona. One rainy afternoon, he was sent to her private sitting room to mend the fire. He entered quietly, expecting the room to be empty. Instead, he found Genevieve at her writing desk, not composing polite letters, but hunched over a stack of formidable-looking ledgers. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a smudge of ink was on her cheek, and she was chewing on the end of her quill, an act of such unladylike anxiety that it startled him. She didn't hear him enter. He watched for a moment from the doorway, a silent observer. He saw her hand tremble slightly as she tallied a long column of figures. She let out a soft, frustrated sigh and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, her shoulders slumping in a wave of what looked like pure exhaustion and despair. The Ice Queen had melted, replaced by a young woman drowning in worry. He made a deliberate noise, clearing his throat softly. She jumped, her mask of composure instantly snapping back into place. Her back straightened, and her hand smoothed the papers into a neat pile, covering them with a piece of blotting paper. "The fire needed seeing to, my lady," he said, his voice a low murmur as he knelt at the hearth. "Yes." "Thank you, Leo," she replied, her tone once again cool and distant. But Addie saw the faint blush on her cheeks and the way her gaze darted to the ledgers, as if to ensure their secrets were safe. He worked in silence, acutely aware of her watching him. He was a footman, a piece of furniture, and yet he had seen something he was not meant to see. Another time, he was carrying a heavy load of firewood through the West Wing when he heard the sound of the pianoforte coming from the music room. The melody was not the precise, technically perfect piece she played for guests. This was something else, entirely. A composition that was wild, passionate, and filled with a profound sadness. It soared with a desperate longing before crashing into a cascade of dark, tumultuous chords. Drawn by the sound, Addie set the wood down and peeked through the crack of the slightly ajar door. He saw Genevieve at the piano, her eyes closed, her body swaying with the music. This was not a performance. This was a confession. Every note was a cry from a soul he was beginning to realize was trapped. When the final, sorrowful chord faded into silence, her hands remained on the keys, her head bowed. He saw a single tear trace a path down her cheek and fall onto the ivory. He retreated before she could see him, his own heart aching with a confusing mix of pity and fascination. Who was this woman? The cold socialite who spoke of marriage as a duty, or the weeping artist who poured her hidden sorrows into music? Their interactions became more frequent, though always brief and bound by the strictures of their supposed stations. He would hand her a book in the library, and their fingers would brush for a split second, sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through him. She would look up, her blue eyes wide with a flicker of surprise, before quickly pulling her hand away. He began to notice small things. She always thanked the servants, a small courtesy many in the aristocracy omitted. He saw her sneak leftover cakes from the kitchen to give to the stable boy, a young orphan named Finn. He once saw her sitting in a hidden alcove of the garden, speaking softly to her younger sister, Rosalind, her face animated with genuine warmth and affection as she braided wildflowers into the girl's hair. This was the Genevieve he had hoped to find. A woman of depth, kindness, and hidden passions. The arrangement he had once dreaded was beginning to look less like a sentence and more like a privilege. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to catch another glimpse of the real woman behind the mask. As Leo, he felt a protectiveness over her, a desire to understand the source of her secret sadness and, foolishly, to ease it. He was falling in love. Not with the idea of Lady Genevieve, his fiancée, but with the woman herself, the woman who worried over ledgers, who played heartbreaking music in secret, and who showed quiet kindness when she thought no one was watching. His deception, however, was a double-edged sword. The closer he got, the more the lie chafed at him. He was earning her trust, or at least her notice, under false pretenses. What would happen when she learned the truth? Would she see his actions as a romantic quest for authenticity, or as the ultimate betrayal? One evening, Lord Percival Devereux came to dinner. He was a neighbouring landowner, handsome, impossibly charming, and possessing a reputation for being as ruthless in business as he was in seduction. Addie, serving wine, watched him with an immediate and visceral dislike. Devereux's attention was fixed solely on Genevieve. "My dear Lady Genevieve," Devereux purred, his smile not reaching his cold, calculating eyes. "You seem tense. The pressures of a grand engagement, I presume? The Duke of Westmoreland is a very fortunate man. To win such a prize." Addie's hand tightened on the neck of the decanter. Devereux spoke of her as if she were a horse he had lost at auction. Genevieve's smile was brittle. "The Duke and I are both aware of our duties, Lord Devereux." "Ah, duty," Devereux mused, swirling the wine in his glass. "A cold bedfellow. One must hope the ducal coffers are warm enough to compensate." The comment was a brazen insult, veiled in slick charm. Addie saw a flash of pure fire in Genevieve's eyes before it was quickly extinguished, replaced by her usual placid mask. "My family's comfort and security are my primary concern," she said, her voice like ice. "That is all that matters." Later that night, as Addie lay on his thin mattress in the servants' quarters, Devereux's words and Genevieve's stark reply played over and over in his mind. "My family's comfort and security are my primary concern." It sounded so transactional, so cold. It was a direct contradiction to the glimpses of warmth he had seen. He was caught in a storm of conflicting evidence. Was she the kind woman he was beginning to love, forced into a difficult position? Or was she the master manipulator the rumors claimed her to be, showing him only what she wanted him to see? He was more confused than ever. He needed a definitive answer. He needed to hear the truth from her own lips, in a moment when she believed herself to be completely and utterly alone. He didn't know then that he would get his wish, and that the truth he so desperately sought would destroy him. The annual de Courtenay Garden party was the highlight of the local social calendar, a final flourish before the family departed for the London season. The sprawling lawns of Barrington Hall were transformed into a sea of pastel silks, fluttering fans and bobbing parasols. Laughter and the light strains of a string quartet drifted on the warm afternoon air. For Addie, it was a day of relentless work. Dressed in the formal livery, he moved through the crowds with trays of champagne and delicate pastries, his body on autopilot, while his eyes constantly scanned for one person. He had become an expert at tracking Genevieve's movements, a silent, invisible satellite in her orbit. Today, she was the perfect hostess, a vision in a gown of pale blue that matched her eyes. She drifted from group to group, offering a graceful smile here, a polite word there. To the casual observer, she was the epitome of grace and contentment, a bride-to-be basking in her good fortune. But Addie saw the truth. He saw the subtle tension in her smile, the way her fingers worried the stem of her untouched champagne flute, and the weary, haunted look that clouded her eyes when she thought no one was looking. Lord Devereux was, predictably, a constant presence at her side. His possessive posture and smug expression grated on Addie's nerves like sand on silk. He watched as Devereux leaned in close, whispering something in Genevieve's ear that made her flinch, a barely perceptible motion that Addie, in his heightened state of awareness, caught instantly. The afternoon wore on, and Addie's duties took him to a small, secluded terrace near the rose garden, where he was to replenish a drink station. The area was partially shielded by a large, ornate trellis thick with blooming white roses, their scent heavy in the air. As he uncorked a new bottle of champagne, he heard voices from the other side of the trellis, Genevieve's voice, and that of her younger sister, Rosalind. He froze. This was it. A private conversation, unguarded. He knew he should leave, that to eavesdrop was a dishonorable act, but the desperate need to understand the woman he was to marry, the woman he was falling for, overpowered every gentlemanly instinct he possessed. He pressed himself back against the cool stone wall, hidden by the screen of leaves and flowers. "I cannot bear it much longer, Jen." Rosalind's voice was a worried whisper. "Lord Devereux watches you, like a wolf watches a lamb. And you look so unhappy." There was a pause, and Addie could picture Genevieve's perfect mask of composure. "Happiness is a luxury, Rosalind. You know this. Security is a necessity." "But to marry a man you have never even properly met," Rosalind protested. "The Duke of Westmoreland is a complete stranger. They say he is stern and proud. What if he is cruel? What if you are miserable for the rest of your life?" Addie held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs, every fibre of his being strained to hear her response. This was the moment of truth. Genevieve's sigh was a long, shaky exhalation, a sound of such profound weariness that it physically pained him. When she spoke again, her voice was stripped of all its polished artifice. It was raw, brittle, and terribly, terribly quiet. It was the voice of the woman who played the pianoforte in the dark, the woman who wept over ledgers. "It does not matter what kind of man he is," she said, her voice a ghost of a whisper. This was the whisper he'd been waiting for, the whisper that would define everything. Rosalind's voice was laced with disbelief. "How can you say that? Of course it matters." "No," Genevieve insisted, and her next words were delivered with a chilling finality, each one a perfectly aimed dart that flew through the trellis and pierced Addie's heart. "I will do my duty. I will smile. I will be the perfect duchess, and I will produce an heir. I will endure the Duke, but I will never love the man." Addie felt the air leave his lungs. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "I will endure the Duke." Rosalind was crying now. "Oh, Jen, to live without love." "Love?" Genevieve's short, bitter laugh was the cruelest sound Addie had ever heard. "Love does not pay father's debts. Love does not secure your future or mine. Love does not restore the de Courtenay name." She paused, and her voice dropped even lower, a venomous secret shared between sisters. "The title is the prize, Rosalind, not him. The man is simply the vessel that carries it. The man is simply the vessel." The champagne bottle slipped from Addie's numb fingers. It didn't shatter, but landed with a dull thud on the grass, a sound that went unheard over the sisters' quiet grief and the distant party music. It was over. Every hopeful sign, every crack in the facade, every shared glance, every moment of kindness he had witnessed, it was all rewritten in an instant. They weren't glimpses of her true soul. They were irrelevant. Her kindness to the stable boy, her sad music, her secret anxieties, none of it mattered in the face of this cold, hard truth. truth. She was not trapped. She was a willing participant in her own gilded cage, and she was forging the bars herself. He had come here seeking the real Genevieve, and he had found her. She was not a marble statue. She was something far worse. She was a woman who would look him in the eye on their wedding day, a man who was falling in love with her, and see nothing but a title, a prize, a vessel. He felt a cold, hollowing devastation unlike anything he had ever known. It was a profound, personal annihilation. He had stripped himself of his identity, humbled himself, worked with his hands, all in the hope of finding a heart worthy of his own. Instead, he had discovered he did not even factor into the equation. Addie Myers did not exist to her. Only the Duke of Westmoreland did. He backed away from the trellis, his movements stiff and robotic. The sounds of the party were a dull roar in his ears. The scent of roses was suddenly cloying, suffocating. He looked down at his hands, calloused and rough from a footman's labor, and a humorless, broken smile touched his lips. He had dressed as a footman to see if she was worthy of him. He had just heard, in her own words, that she believed he wasn't even worthy of being loved. The whisper had not just shattered his hopes for their future. It had shattered him completely. The world did not stop. The sun continued its slow descent. The string quartet played on, and the laughter of the guests still echoed across the lawns. But for Addie, everything had turned to ash. The whisper had been a venom, and it was now spreading through his system, freezing his blood, turning his burgeoning love into a shard of ice in his chest. He moved through the rest of the party in a daze of cold fury and profound hurt. His training as a duke, the years of schooling his features into an impassive mask for political meetings and court appearances, served him well. As Leo, his face became a blank slate of perfect servitude. He refilled glasses, cleared plates, and answered requests with a clipped, chilling efficiency. The change was so subtle that only someone watching closely would have noticed the life had gone out of his eyes. Genevieve did. Later, as twilight bled across the sky and guests began to depart, she found herself on the main terrace. She saw Leo moving among the last of the stragglers, his posture rigid. Over the past few weeks, she had grown accustomed to his quiet presence. There had been an intelligence in his eyes, a stillness about him that she found strangely calming. She had found herself speaking to him more than any other servant, asking his opinion on which book to read, a shocking breach of protocol that she couldn't explain. There was a connection, a silent understanding she felt when he was near. Now, that was gone. When his eyes met hers for a brief moment, they were like chips of flint, hard, cold, and utterly empty. He looked through her as if she were made of glass. The footman who had once looked at her with a disquieting intensity now saw nothing at all. The shift was so abrupt, so complete, that it unnerved her. She felt a bizarre and unwelcome sense of loss. For Addie, the days that followed were a living hell. He had to remain at Barrington Hall until Grimes could arrange a plausible reason for Leo's departure. So he stayed, and he served the woman who had unknowingly gutted him. He brought her morning tea, his hand steady, his face impassive, avoiding the questioning look in her blue eyes. He tended the fire in her sitting room, watching her from the corner of his eye as she struggled with her father's ledgers. But now he felt no pity, only a cold confirmation of her mercenary nature. She was calculating the value of her prize. His pain curdled into a bitter resolve. The engagement was over. He would instruct his solicitors to break the contract the moment he returned to London. He would be polite, clinical, and final. He would cite incompatibility. He would offer a generous settlement to the Baron to avoid a scandal and cushion the family's fall, not out of kindness, but out of a duke's duty to tidy his affairs. He would erase the de Courtenay family and Lady Genevieve from his life. The decision brought him no comfort. It only hollowed him out further. The change in Leo did not go unnoticed by the staff. Thomas and William, his roommates, put it down to city-bred arrogance. Mr. Hobbs watched him with a worried eye, sensing a storm brewing beneath the surface. Genevieve found it increasingly difficult to ignore. One afternoon, she found him in the library, polishing the silver candlesticks with a grim focus. "Leo," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He did not look up. "My lady." The words were clipped, devoid of any warmth. "I was wondering if you had a moment to help me with a book from the higher shelf." It was a flimsy excuse. She could use the ladder. But she needed to break through this new wall of ice he had erected. "Of course, my lady," he said, his voice flat. He moved to the bookshelf, retrieved the ladder, and climbed it with an athletic grace she'd always found surprising in a footman. He did not ask which book. He simply waited. "The green one," she said, pointing. "The poems by Donne." He plucked it from the shelf and descended. He held it out to her, his gaze fixed on a point just over her shoulder. As she reached for it, her fingers brushed his. This time there was no spark. His hand was cold, and he pulled it back, as if burned. "Is everything all right, Leo?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "You have seemed distant." For the first time in days, he met her eyes directly. The raw, unguarded pain in his gaze was so potent it was like a physical blow. It was the look of a man betrayed. It was so intense, so personal, that it made no sense at all. He was a footman. She was his employer's daughter. What could she have possibly done to warrant such a look? "I am perfectly well, my lady," he said, his voice a low, rough thing. "I simply know my place." He gave a short, formal bow and returned to his silver, his back a rigid wall of dismissal. Genevieve stood frozen, the book of poetry clutched in her hand. "I simply know my place." The words were a rebuke, though for what she did not know. His sorrowful, accusing eyes were seared into her mind. She felt a deep, aching confusion. Why did the opinion of this footman matter to her? Why did his sudden coldness feel like a personal rejection, one that hurt more than any of Lord Devereux's cutting remarks? She fled the library, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, Addie's torment was compounded by the continued presence of Lord Devereux, who now visited Barrington Hall with alarming frequency. Addie was forced to serve the man wine, to watch his slick, possessive advances toward Genevieve, and to listen to his veiled taunts. He saw how Genevieve recoiled from Devereux's touch, how her face paled when he was near. Initially, Addie had seen this as part of her act, the reluctant bride making her sacrifice. But now, watching more closely, he saw something else. It wasn't reluctance. It was fear. Genuine, palpable fear. Devereux was not just a suitor. He was a predator. And Genevieve was his cornered prey. One evening, Addie was clearing the table on the veranda after the Baron and Devereux had finished a late game of cards. The two men had moved to the edge of the lawn, their voices carrying on the still night air. "The girl is playing coy," Devereux said, his voice smug. "But she'll come around. She has no choice." "The engagement to Westmoreland is all but signed," the Baron grumbled, his voice thick with brandy. "Contracts can be broken, my dear Baron." Devereux's voice was like silk sliding over steel. "Especially when one party discovers the other is insolvent, utterly and completely ruined. A duke has a reputation to protect. He can't be seen marrying into a family of beggars whose estate is mortgaged to the last roof tile. Addy froze behind a stone pillar, a stack of plates heavy in his hands. The Baron sputtered, "You wouldn't." "Oh, I would," Devereux said with a soft chuckle. "I have spent a small fortune acquiring your debts, Baron. Every last one of them. You don't just owe money to the bank. You owe it to me. One word from me to the Duke's solicitors, and your precious daughter's grand marriage evaporates. Your family is cast into the street. But I am a reasonable man. Persuade Genevieve to accept my hand instead. Her beauty for your salvation. It's a very simple transaction." The world, which had shattered for Addy in the rose garden, now rearranged itself into a new, horrific picture. The ledgers, Genevieve's desperation, her fear of Devereux, her bitter words to Rosalind. Love does not pay father's debts. The title is the prize, not him. It hadn't been a confession of her cold-hearted ambition. It had been a cry of utter desperation. She wasn't choosing a title over a man. She was choosing her family's survival over her own heart. She was sacrificing herself on the altar of her father's ruin, and Devereux was the vulture circling overhead, ready to snatch her away if her original sacrifice failed. The ice in Addy's veins did not melt. It fractured. He had been so consumed by his own wounded pride, his own shattered ego, that he had been blind to the truth of her predicament. He had judged her, condemned her, and hated her for words she had been forced to speak. He looked across the lawn at the two men, one weak and the other wicked, and then he looked up at the lighted window of Genevieve's room. She was not a villain. She was a victim. And he, in his ignorance and pain, had just made himself her silent, unwitting tormentor. The revelation struck Addy with the force of a physical blow. He stood in the shadows of the veranda, the plates in his hands forgotten, as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Genevieve wasn't a mercenary. She was a sacrifice. She was a daughter trying to hold a crumbling dynasty together with the only thing of value she had left. Herself. Her whispered words in the rose garden replayed in his mind. But this time they sounded different. The bitterness he had heard was not aimed at him, the unknown Duke, but at the cruel fate that had forced her hand. The coldness was not a character trait. It was a shield forged in desperation to protect herself from the emotional cost of what she was about to do. She was convincing herself, as much as Rosalind, that love was irrelevant, because to admit its importance would be to acknowledge the true horror of a loveless, transactional life. And Devereux, the man was not just a rival. He was a blackmailer, a predator who had engineered the family's ruin to trap her. He had bought her father's debts, holding them like a noose he could tighten at any moment. A wave of self-loathing washed over Addy. While he had been nursing his wounded pride, playing the part of the wronged man, Genevieve had been living in a private hell, tormented by a secret she could share with no one. His coldness, his judgmental silence in the past few days, must have been just one more weight upon her already burdened shoulders. He had seen her pain and, in his arrogance, had mistaken it for a flaw. His purpose shifted in an instant. This was no longer about his feelings or the broken engagement. This was about justice. It was about protecting the woman he now knew, beyond any doubt, that he loved. Not the idealized version he had hoped to find, but this one, the fiercely proud, secretly terrified, and incredibly strong woman who was willing to sacrifice everything for her family. He had to act, but his disguise was now a cage. As Leo the Footman, he was powerless. He could do nothing but watch and listen. But the Duke of Westmoreland, the Duke could destroy a man like Devereux without a second thought. For now, he had to remain Leo. He needed more information. He needed to understand the full scope of Devereux's plan. He began to watch the man with a new intensity, no longer as a jealous suitor, but as a general studying his enemy. He made himself truly invisible, a shadow in the halls, his ears open to every conversation. His chance came 2 days later. Devereux arrived unannounced, his mood darker and more impatient than usual. He brushed past the butler, demanding to see Lady Genevieve alone. Mr. Hobbs, flustered, directed him to the conservatory at the back of the house. Knowing this was a critical moment, Addie acted quickly. He grabbed a watering can from a utility closet, inventing a pressing need to tend to the ferns inside the conservatory. He entered through a side door just moments after Devereux, keeping a large potted palm between himself and them, his movements slow and methodical as he pretended to work. Genevieve stood near the glass wall, her back ramrod straight. She looked pale, but defiant. "Your visits are becoming tiresome, my lord," she said, her voice sharp. "And your delays are becoming insulting," Devereux shot back, dispensing with all pretense of charm. He stepped closer, invading her space. "The Duke will be arriving in the region soon to finalize the arrangements. My offer expires the moment he sets foot on this property. Have you made your choice?" "My choice was made months ago," she said. "I am to marry the Duke of Westmoreland." Devereux laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You speak of it like a settled matter. It is not. It is a house of cards, and I am holding the one that brings it all down." He reached into his coat and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Your father's promissory notes, every last one of them, signed over to me. I own this house, my dear. I own that dress on your back. I own the very air you breathe. And if you marry the Duke, I will present these to his solicitors the very next day. The scandal will be spectacular. The de Courtenays exposed as bankrupts and charlatans. Your father will see debtor's prison. You and your sister will be destitute. Is that the wedding gift you wish to give your new husband?" Genevieve flinched as if he had struck her. Her face was as white as marble. "What is it you want?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What I have always wanted," he said, his eyes raking over her. "You. Publicly break your engagement to the Duke. Announce your intention to marry me. I will be generous. I will tear up these notes as a wedding present. Your father is saved. Barrington Hall is saved. You will be Lady Devereux." "And be your property forever?" she spat, a spark of her true fire returning. "A beautiful, well-kept property," he purred, reaching out to touch a lock of her hair. She recoiled violently. "Do not touch me." His face hardened. "Do not mistake your position, Genevieve. You have no power here. You are a commodity, and 2 buyers have shown an interest. One, the Duke, is offering a high price, but he is unaware that the merchandise is flawed, tainted by ruin. I, on the other hand, know exactly what I am buying, and I am offering a deal that saves you from the scrap heap. Choose." Addie's blood ran cold. He had never in his life felt such a potent, murderous rage. To see her cornered, threatened, and spoken to in such a vile manner ignited a primal fury within him. His knuckles were white where he gripped the handle of the watering can. It took every ounce of his considerable self-control not to drop his disguise, cross the room, and beat Devereux to within an inch of his life. But that would solve nothing. It would expose his deception and potentially ruin Genevieve's reputation in the process. He had to be smarter. He had to play the long game. "I need more time," Genevieve said, her voice barely audible. "You have until the midsummer ball this Saturday," Devereux snapped. "I will expect your answer then, and I expect it to be the correct one. Make no mistake, Genevieve. If you defy me, I will not only ruin you, I will enjoy doing it." He turned on his heel and strode out of the conservatory, leaving Genevieve standing alone, trembling. She wrapped her arms around herself, her perfect posture finally collapsing. A choked sob escaped her lips, and she sank onto a stone bench, burying her face in her hands. Addy remained frozen behind the palm, his heart breaking for her. He wanted to go to her, to comfort her, to tell her that none of it was real, that he was here and he would save her. But he was Leo, the footman. All he could do was offer her a glass of water and a comforting platitude. He knew then what he had to do. The midsummer ball was in 3 days. Devereux had set the stage for the final act. Addy would have to write the ending himself. He would let this charade play out until the very last moment. He would allow Devereux to feel the full flush of victory, to believe he had won. And then, at the height of the ball, in front of all their peers, the Duke of Westmoreland would make his appearance. He would not just save Genevieve. He would utterly and completely annihilate the man who had tried to destroy her. The predator's gambit would end in his own public execution. Addy slipped out of the conservatory, his mind a whirlwind of cold, calculated fury. The game was on. The ballroom at Barrington Hall was a glittering spectacle, a brave facade against the family's crumbling fortunes. Hundreds of candles cast a warm, dancing light over the county's elite. But for Addy, the brilliance felt cold and sharp. Stationed near the grand staircase in his footman's livery, he was a silent observer at the heart of the storm, his gaze tracking the two people who mattered, the predator and his prey. He saw Lord Devereux first, arrogant and triumphant in black velvet, moving through the crowd as if he were already its master. Then he saw Genevieve. She descended the staircase not as a bride-to-be, but as a tragic queen from a play. Her gown was a defiant slash of crimson silk amidst a sea of pastels, and rubies in her golden hair glittered like blood drops. Her beauty was startling, but it was a weapon turned against herself. Her face was pale, and her eyes held the terrified resignation of someone walking toward a cliff's edge. As her gaze swept the room, it met Addy's for a fleeting, desperate moment, a silent plea that solidified his resolve into granite. The evening was a torturous performance. Devereux was a possessive shadow at Genevieve's side, his hand too firm on her back, his smile a constant, menacing presence. Addy watched, his fury a controlled inferno, as Genevieve endured it all with a brittle grace that was more heartbreaking than tears. He saw her father, the Baron, drowning his shame in brandy, and her sister Rosalind, watching with helpless sorrow. Just after midnight, Devereux made his move. Leading Genevieve to the center of the floor, he tapped a champagne flute for silence. A hush fell, thick with anticipation. "My dear friends," Devereux announced, his voice booming with false sincerity, "I have a joyous announcement. Lady Genevieve de Courtenay has had a change of heart. She has come to realize that a true and local affection is far preferable to a distant, cold arrangement." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Devereux tightened his grip on Genevieve's hand, a cruel, silent command. "Tell them, my dear," he urged, his smile a predator's slash. Genevieve's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. They finally locked on Leo, the footman, and in his fierce, steady gaze, she found a strange, inexplicable anchor. She began, her voice a thread. What she means to say. A new voice interrupted, cutting through the tension with an authority that commanded absolute attention. Every head turned. Addy stepped forward from the shadows of the staircase. He was still in a servant's livery, but he moved with the fluid confidence of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. Devereux glared at him. "Who is this? Have the servants been given a voice tonight, Baron?" Addie's eyes were fixed only on Genevieve, burning with a fire she now recognized as fierce protectiveness. "You will not speak for her, Devereux," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you will unhand her. Now." "You dare give me orders?" Devereux snarled, his face purpling with rage. "You will be horsewhipped for this insolence." "I think not," Addie replied with chilling calm. He reached up and, with a slow, deliberate motion, unfastened the high collar of his jacket. He shrugged the coarse garment from his shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. Dressed now in the fine linen shirt of a gentleman, he met the stunned gaze of the crowd. "For those of you who do not know me," he announced, his voice ringing with power, "my name is Addie Myers. I am the 8th Duke of Westmoreland, and that is my fiancée, whose arm you are so rudely restraining." The silence that followed was so profound, it was almost violent. Genevieve stared, her mind unable to process the impossible truth. Leo, the footman who read poetry, whose inexplicable coldness had wounded her, was the Duke himself. Devereux's face turned a sickly white. He dropped Genevieve's arm as if it were on fire. "Westmoreland, this is absurd, a trick." "Is it?" Addie took another step forward, his eyes like chips of ice. "I came to Barrington Hall in disguise to learn the true character of my future wife. Instead, I learned the true character of a blackmailer and a coward." He addressed the spellbound guests. "This man has been buying the Baron's debts for the sole purpose of threatening this family with ruin, all to force Lady Genevieve into marrying him." "It's a lie," Devereux stammered, his composure shattering. "Then you won't object when my solicitors begin a full inquiry into your financial affairs tomorrow," Addie countered smoothly. "As for the de Courtenay debts," he added, his gaze flicking to the shell-shocked Baron, "consider them paid. I will absorb them as part of the marriage settlement." He walked the final few steps to Genevieve, the world shrinking to the space between them. He ignored the hundreds of watching eyes and spoke only to her, his voice low and aching with regret. "Forgive me. Forgive my deception and my blindness. My pride made me deaf to your pain. I see you now, Genevieve. I see all of you." Tears she hadn't known she was holding back streamed down her face. This was real. He was real. Addie turned back to the ashen-faced Devereux, his expression merciless. "You are not welcome here. If I see your face or hear your name again, I will personally see to your complete and utter ruin. Now get out." The command was absolute. Broken and exposed, Devereux stumbled backward through the crowd, which parted for him as if he carried a plague. He fled the ballroom in utter humiliation. The unmasking was complete. The predator had been vanquished, and in the center of the silent room, Addie and Genevieve stood amidst the wreckage of their secrets, a future waiting to be reckoned with. The great ballroom fell silent, the scandalized whispers of the departing guests fading into the night. In the vast empty space, Addie and Genevieve stood alone, the discarded footman's jacket a lonely relic on the polished floor between them. The air was thick with all that had been revealed and all that remained unsaid. "You," Genevieve finally whispered, her voice fragile as she tried to reconcile the footman she had known with the Duke before her. "It was you all along." "Yes," Addie said, his own voice heavy with regret. "And I am more sorry than I can say. Not for the deception, but for my blindness. I heard your words in the garden, and my wounded pride made me deaf to your pain. I judged you without understanding the weight of the burden you carried. Can you forgive me?" She looked at him, truly seeing the man behind the dual masks he had worn. "There is nothing to forgive. I said those things because I had to believe them. To hope for a marriage of affection would have made my duty unbearable." "The marriage contract can be torn up," he stated, his voice firm as he closed the remaining distance between them. "Your family's debts are my concern now, regardless of your decision. You are free, Genevieve. You do not have to marry me." Freedom. It was the one thing she never thought she would have. For a moment, she considered it, but as she looked at the man who had humbled himself to know her, who had felt her pain and vanquished her demons, she knew her choice was already made. "And what if I don't want to be free of you?" she asked, her voice trembling with a nascent, terrifying hope. "What if I find I am not marrying a title, but a man I am beginning to admire more than any I have ever known?" A slow, genuine smile of profound relief transformed Addie's face. "Then I would say, the man is far luckier than the Duke. I set out to unmask you, and in the end, I unmasked myself." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Marry me, Genevieve de Courtenay. Not to save your family, but to start one with me. Marry me, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that the man is worthy of your love, not just your endurance." Tears of joy, not sorrow, welled in her eyes. The whisper in the rose garden had been the sound of her soul breaking. This, here in the silent ballroom, was the sound of it healing. "Yes, Addie," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I will marry you." He did not kiss her. Instead, he simply held her hand, a quiet promise passing between them. Their story had not been born in the gilded drawing rooms of London, but forged in secrecy and sacrifice. It was a foundation of hard-won truth on which they would finally build their lives together. And so, the story of the Duke and his lady began not with a formal proposal, but with the shedding of a footman's livery and the unmasking of two hearts. Addie and Genevieve's journey to the altar was one of deception, misunderstanding, and profound sacrifice. He had to become a servant to learn how to be a true partner, and she had to face absolute ruin to discover her own strength. Theirs is a love story that reminds us that true connection is rarely found in the grand titles we hold, but in the secret burdens we carry and the vulnerabilities we have the courage to share. What we are willing to endure for family and what we are willing to risk for love can often lead us to the most unexpected and beautiful truths about ourselves and each other. If their dramatic journey from a devastating whisper to a promise of forever has touched your heart, please show your support. Like this video, share it with fellow lovers of history and romance, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of love against all odds. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for listening.